Namaste and good evening, everyone. I, Ritika Gupta, Assistant Director at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, welcome you to IMPRI #Web Policy Talk. Today, we have gathered here to discuss on a very pertinent issue, migrant workers and childcare in Thailand and Myanmar by Professor Kyoko Kusakabe. I request Anshula to moderate this session further. Thank you.
Thank you, Ritika. Good evening, everyone. I'm Anshula Mehta, Assistant Director at IMPRI, and on behalf of the IMPRI Gender Impact Studies Center, GenDev CRI, and Delhi Post, I welcome you all to episode 26 of our talk series, The State of Gender Equality, #GenderGaps. Um, Today, as Ritika mentioned, we have with us Professor Kyoko Kusakabe, who will be talking on migrant workers and childcare in Thailand and Myanmar. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us today. It's my pleasure to introduce her to you all. Professor Kyoko is a professor of Gender and Development Studies at Department of Development and Sustainability, School of Environment Resources and Development at the Asian Institute of Technology in Thailand. She has over 20 years of experience in research and teaching gender and development in Asia, especially focusing on the Mekong sub-region. Aside from her academic work, she has experience in working with NGOs and government organizations for gender mainstreaming and integration of gender issues. Her research focus is on gender issues in labor and work, especially on labor migration, garment factory workers, informal employment, and agriculture and fisheries. She has published or edited 5 books, over 50 journal papers, over 20 chapters in books, over 20 monographs, and managed over 40 projects as PI or co PI. She is a co author of Thailand's Hidden Workforce, Burmese Migrant Women Factory Workers, with Ruth Pearson, and has co edited Fisher Folk in Cambodia, India, and Sri Lanka, Migration, Gender, and Wellbeing. Thank you, Professor Kyoko, for taking out the time to join us today to talk on this topic. We also have with us our chair for the session, Professor Govind Kelkar, who is the chairperson of the Gender Impact Studies Center at IMPRI, and also the executive director of the GenDev Center for Research and Innovation. We will also be joined by several discussants today, including Professor Ritu Agarwal, who is an associate professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Professor Babu P Ramesh, who is a professor at Ambedkar University, Delhi, also Dr. Ashima Sood, who is an associate professor at Anant National University, Ahmedabad, and Dr. Divya Verma, consultant at the Indian Institute for Human Settlements, Bangalore. So without further ado, I hand it to you, Professor Govind Kelkar, to take over. Thank you.
Well, welcome Kyoko virtually to India. And it's so nice to see you after maybe several years, I think. And other discussant. I'm glad that you are really talking of the importance of migration. I mean, you have been working in this area, I know, because there is a lot more rethinking on migration that is going on in terms of their roles, in terms of in the receiving and sending countries, their contributions, working conditions, extent of decent work, and adequate wages. I mean, these are the discussed also in the European Union, I mean, the Policy Forum on Development. So there is a whole lot of rethinking is going on. Migrants who were treated as kind of something that Trump administration, the way they considered migrants and the way now it is considered in terms of research. This has been the research contribution to the whole question of migrant conditions, and also childcare facilities, entitlement to that, and to what extent they are adequate or inadequate. So with that kind of perspective, it would be very, very important, very kind of interesting session, and we look forward to your presentation and also the presentations of the 4 discussants who are expert on this subject. So over to you. Thank you. Welcome once again.
Professor Kyoko, please unmute yourself. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Kyoko. And thank you very much for IMPRI for inviting me for this, giving me this opportunity to present. Today, this is my title, Migrant Workers and Childcare in Thailand and Myanmar. So as Professor Kyoko just said, there's a lot of work now talking about the migrant workers, women migrant workers, and all that. So, but many of the work that has been is concentrated on working conditions of women migrant workers. So it's a women as workers, migrant workers have been discussed quite a lot. But the issue of social reproduction, and so there, the childbearing, child rearing, and community building, this kind of social reproduction has gravely been neglected. So this is where we are looking at the child care part of the migrant workers. When we're talking about childcare, most of the migrant literature talks about these transnational families and distance mothering. So there have been a lot of discussion about domestic workers, child caretakers, migrants, and then there's distance mothering. Or there are more recently, there are more studies that talk about the plight of the children left behind by migrant parents. So these are some of the studies that is emerging. But then there's not so much discussion on the childcare arrangement for children who travel with their migrant parents, because there is a kind of a belief that these children will be taken care of by people back home, and then the migrants will go alone. But then what we are saying is that actually that's a myth, and then that doesn't happen so often. So so in this presentation today, we'd like to look at the childcare strategies of migrants at the place of destination. So because like even in Myanmar, even in this region, it is believed that migrating parents will send their children back home to be taken care of back home. But then that's not really the case. Or like and then having children at that place of destination actually affect how much they were able to earn money. So the impact of this child care arrangement is also quite significant, which we also need to look at. So the childcare arrangement is not just like, okay, I will take care or you take care. Or so it's not a very simple arrangement. It's actually a very complicated arrangement, and how that arrangement is decided is very much very much depending on the contested power structure that surrounds the migrant workers. So that's why looking at childcare arrangement sheds light on what kind of position the migrant workers are in. So that's why this complication of childcare arrangement is something that we would like to look at. So like what Leo was saying, these webs of interdependence. So it is how the childcare is arranged is a result of reciprocity and obligation, or what Bodasar and Marla said about the circulation of care. So it's reciprocal, asymmetry, and multi-directional exchange. So you can see here how child care is a result of a very complex power structure that surrounds the migrant workers. And when Jose talked about the delegation of childcare, but how that is determined is very much depending on what kind of resources migrant workers can have access to and the power relations that surround them. So some of the challenges faced by migrants on childcare. So not only the local women also have face a lot of challenge in childcare arrangement, but the migrant workers have even more challenges in terms of arranging for childcare. First of all, they do not have the established support network, because when they come to the place of destination, the social network is very weak. So that's why they do not have a lot of support that they used to have in the place of origin. So that puts them in a very much of a disadvantage in terms of how to arrange. So the options for childcare can be quite limited. poverty is also another point, because they can come here to earn money, so they do not want to spend a lot of money, and then they don't and then since they have to also remit a lot of money, they also suffer from poverty and then the need to earn money. So if they have to go out to work, so they cannot just become a full-time child caretaker because of the economic need that is there. And then added to that, like compared to rural area in Myanmar, Bangkok is very high in the cost of living. So you do need to earn money in order to survive in a place of destination. So these are all things that come up on to migrant workers when they want to think about how am I going to arrange a child care for my children. Housing is another problem. Normally, government migrant workers will live in a very poor housing, very small place, very congested. So it's very difficult to have children in a place where you have to share the room with several other people. So housing is another challenge. And then also in the region that we look at, child care is often seen as a sole responsibility of women. As you can see here, the migrant women do have like almost 100% decision-making power on childcare. But that is not something that is very empowering. That is actually more of a responsibility and more of a burden for women, because they are the one who have to think what to do with the children. So that's why, yes, they have decision making over childcare, but then that is actually experienced as a lot of creates a lot of difficulty for these migrant workers. Now, the cases that I'm going to share with you is this Mekong region, Greater Mekong Sub-region that ADB calls Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, and Yunnan, China. So this is the whole area where regional economic integration is facilitated. So the people going here, the mobility of people have been facilitated before COVID. So not after COVID, but until COVID came around, the mobility of people and capital information were very much facilitated. So that's where a lot of the migrant workers come from these neighboring countries, Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos, to Thailand to work, because there's more work in Thailand. So we have been working on migrant workers since 2006. So we have this presentation that I'm sharing with you today is based on several research that we have done in the past, and look at some of the child care arrangement that we have seen among the migrant workers. But this is only cases for this region. So in your region, maybe you have more different kind of childcare arrangement, but then that's where what we want to see, that the context and the location actually really shapes kind of childcare options that people will have. So we also, in this presentation, I would also like to focus on the garment industry. So it is the migrant workers working in garment industry, because that's where we have done more studies. So there are many young women of reproductive age come to Thailand to work, or migrate to the capital area to work. So all these migrant women, there's a high percentage of migrant women go to work in garment factories. As you know, Asia is a very large hub of garment production, and but then also at the same time, garment industry is known for its poor working condition, low pay, sexual harassment, and all that. And then the career development is really not existent in garment industries. So women workers work in the line as a line worker with minimum wage for a very long period of time. So just to share with you what kind of working condition that this woman that we are talking about is in. You can see here the kind of places that we have studied in the past. So Myanmar, Cambodia, and Thailand. You can see here that the base wage in some countries, because these Tilawa, Phnom Penh, Manhattan are all special economic zones, so they do comply with the laws. So that's why it's the minimum wage. But in Tak, which is a border area with Myanmar and Thailand, that is actually not a special is not really a protected zone. So you can see here the minimum wage is quite low. It is much lower than the minimum wage. So you can see here that if they are not really in an export processing zone, and then their working condition can be below what is legally stated. So garment workers' working conditions are at best at the legal minimum, and at worst half or even lower than the legal minimum. So that's the kind of the women who are working with this kind of wages are the people that we are looking at in this study. So so Thailand. So just to inform you about this mobility situation in this region, Thailand is now becoming a hub for migrant workers to come to work, especially because there much work to do in Thailand. So and then Thailand, because of the labor shortage, they also try to facilitate workers from neighboring countries to come to work. So since 2004, Thai government have opened up this kind of registration so that to facilitate these neighboring country workers to come to work in Thailand. So now they are having this memorandum of understanding with neighboring countries so that under the MOU, people can come register and work. Of course, going through this kind of a legalized registration system is still very expensive and also complicated. So still many workers do come outside this kind of official arrangement. But then still, the situation had become much better than before. Around 70 to 80% of the workers are now considered to be coming under the registration system. Thailand have also started to work on the border. So they also have this section 64, which means that the workers in the neighboring countries can come without any visa to to work at the border provinces. So they have designated several border provinces where the workers can stay there and work. So again, it is from the Thai government side or the Thai enterprise side, it is kind of an easy way to get cheap labor. So this kind of a very limited locational special arrangement have also been introduced in Thailand. So you can see here how much Thailand wants actually these workers to come to work here, but then they work here, but they don't want to have they do not want they actually legally prohibit workers to have children inside Thailand. But then I mean, these are reproductive age workers, so it is very difficult to prohibit them to have children. So so there is still this kind of very uneasiness between the Thai government and the migrant workers in terms of this regulation and what kind of thing they can do and cannot do inside Thailand. 80% of the migrant workers in Thailand are from Myanmar, and then there are some more from Cambodia and then also Laos. So these are the countries that they are coming under this special arrangement of MOU. And there is no official figure on the number of migrant children in Thailand because they're not supposed to be here. So that's why government does not have an official figure of the number of migrant children. But then some studies here shows that something like 300 to 400,000 migrant children are in Thailand. And then some are stateless because they're born here, they're not registered, and they become stateless at the same time. So these are so it's a considerable number of children are also living inside Thailand. The next one shows its internal migration in Cambodia, so from the rural area to Phnom Penh. But then for those kind of migrants, also only 20% of the migrants would leave the children back home, meaning that majority of the migrants will bring the children. So as you can see here, there's a big myth that migrant workers will leave their children back home. They don't. They will bring, most of the people will bring their children with them. So in our study in this region, in the region that we're studying, we identified around 10 childcare arrangements done by migrant workers. So this is what I would like to kind of look at in this presentation. So first of all, childcare by migrant herself. This is actually quite a lot of people do this, and then because especially when women do not have anybody else to rely on, so they do not have any relatives, or they do not have money to hire people. So if they don't have anybody, they would or they kind of feel that this is my responsibility. And then, so these kind of pressures would push them to take care of the children by themselves. And then, if this is the case, they might have to quit the job. Once they quit the job, and then even if they were earning a little bit more, even for migrant workers, they do have some kind of promotion. Once you quit the job, regardless of your experience, you start from zero. So that means that once you quit the job after having children, and then all the experience that they accumulated is going to be erased. So you can so it is a big drawback for migrant workers to retreat, and then for childcare purposes. Many migrants are not entitled to maternity leave, and so sometimes they are able to rely on friends and others, but then that's very, very rare. And then or they have to change to lower paying work, lower paying job in order to balance the childcare, or they bring the children to work. So you can see here in the photo, this is a child is is staying there while the mother is working as in the sewing factory in the same premise. So it's a kind of a self-made nursery that she creates in the factory. So some factory allow this, some factory don't. So this is one way that the child care is being managed. Another way is that childcare is managed by the husband at the place of destination. Also because in the place of destination, it's easier for women to get some kind of a job. Yeah, because women do not mind lower paying jobs, so they do get some of the kind of job. Whereas for men, sometimes it's more difficult to get regular job. So husband will stay at home and look after children. So that kind of a childcare situation is also there. Or they bring somebody from the place of origin to look after children. So like this photo shows that this worker have brought her mother to come and stay with her, and then so that she can take care of the children. The mother was actually very unhappy that to stay in this very cramped migrant housing, but then she was kind of sacrificing for the daughter. But then but then this kind of thing is quite difficult to do it in the capital, where the police surveillance is much more harsher, because they cannot just get away with it. They have to they have to comply with the law, which does not allow these kind of relatives to come and stay. Yeah, because only workers are able to get visa. So these and then also it's very difficult to bring these people back from the place of origin, because in this region there's a big labor shortage everywhere. So by bringing these people from the place of origin, that means that they do not have enough people to work on the farm, so they will have problems. So that's why it's not that easy to just bring somebody from the place of origin. Some people will hire people to look after children. So so this is very difficult because, like you can see here, sometimes they have to pay like half to 1/3 of their income for childcare. So, and then what are you doing for? Yes, because you have to also remit back home and you have to pay for childcare. So this become a very unsustainable kind of a situation where they are not able to bring their um, uh, okay, sorry, do their have their children, hire somebody to look after the children. Or there is this sometimes you have this leaving the children alone at home. So that is also there, because sometimes they bring the child, they have to go back to go to work, and then but then what to and then they cannot find anybody to look after the children. The last resort is that leave the children at home. But then there are this kind, because they live in a housing area where it's not very secure. There are fire, there's abductions, there's this and that. So so it's quite dangerous actually to do this. But then some people do not have any choice, so they also do that as well. Wait, sorry. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, so you can see here, there's this quote from Tida Kim's study that they are worried when they have to leave the children alone at home. But then they do not have a choice because both husband and wife work. There's also cases where they leave the child in the place of origin with the husband. So the husband is stays at the place of origin, and the only the woman come to work at in Thailand for garment workers as garment work. But then the problem is often happens is that the husband cannot handle childcare alone. So in the end, what he started to do is that he would just leave the child with somebody else, and then comes and follow the wife. So especially this happens for Cambodians. So that's why we see a lot of Cambodians coming in couples. They are not able to leave the child. The husbands have difficulty taking care of child alone. So we have seen a lot of cases where, I mean, some cases they do like this, but then it doesn't last for a long time. There are also some cases where they leave the child in a place of origin with other female relatives, like mothers or grandmothers. So this is a very popular, or like everybody thinks that this is a case that happen more often, but it doesn't happen more often. But then still, it is quite a popular case. The problem is that it's not something that is very, very rosy, in a sense that if you leave your child with somebody and then you have the obligation to remit, you cannot just say that, oh, I'm not going to remit, I'm just having my work life here. Yeah, there's an obligation to remit because you're asking. So it's like hiring your relatives to look after your child, even if it's your own mother. So and then so it also become a very heavy workload for grandmothers, because there's a lot of grandmothers who look after children of several daughters, and then so there were some grandmothers who were looking after 6 or 8 grandchildren alone. So it become a lot of problems. So we had several women who were at first leaving the child at home, but then she have to remit, but then her income started to drop, so she could not remit anymore. And then she started to hear that her children was not being fed very well because she's not being able to remit. So she have to bring the child to live with her and to take care of the child herself, because otherwise she was thinking that her children would not be fed. So when the child came to stay with her, the children were already malnourished. So you can see here how, so this doesn't become a very rosy childcare arrangement, because there's a very severe relationship of reciprocity that is there, that is behind this kind of arrangement as well. There are also cases where the migrant worker leaves the child with not with relatives but others. Like for example, in a temple. So we had in Myanmar, there's one temple which is near the Thai border, and then so when the woman comes and then try to come to work in Thailand, she kind of keep the child with the monk and then come to work in Thailand. So some the monk says and it's not deserting the child, but then it almost become like a deserting the child because the monk never receives any remittances from the mother. But then what happens is that the child is with the monk until the child reaches a kind of working age, and then the mother comes to pick up the child and then go to Thailand together so that the child can also work and earn. So there are childcare that is very severely looking at children as a source of labor. So these are also another way of childcare. There's also cases where children are left alone at the place of origin. So both husband and wife go to Thailand to work, but then they don't have any relatives or grandfather or grandmother to look after children. So what they do is that they kind of leave the children um, at home. So maybe the eldest might be in the primary school and the younger is might be like pre-primary school, preschool, and then so they kind of live together by themselves. So the community people kind of keep an eye on these children, but then of course they do not take responsibility. So again, children kind of take responsibility by themselves. So these there are, I mean, for those parents who really don't have any option, and then this kind of living alone and then letting the children taking care of themselves also becomes an option for them. Or childcare in the daycare centers. Actually, labor law in Cambodia and Myanmar stipulates that factories have to have daycare centers. So it is against the law if you don't have one. So everybody have to have one. So, but then if you go to a factory and then we ask them, okay, where is your daycare centers? And they do have a small kind of very, very tiny room with one sofa or something. Nobody uses it. Nobody uses it. And then the owner says that, well, we don't. Nobody says that they want to have. They want to use the nursery. So that's why it's not being used. Even though we have. So you see here, there's a kind of a chicken and egg kind of problem that nobody is bringing. It's such a very bad service that is there, so that's why nobody wants to bring the child, and then nobody bring the child, so that's why the employer says that nobody wants to use. So and then it's never get improved. So that's how the it never gets to be used. So this law is there, but then it never gets used. Also, even when there's a daycare center and then migrant workers are able to send the children there, but then many of the work that migrant workers do are very irregular. For example, fishing workers. Fisheries workers work in a very odd hours, like 3 o'clock to 10 o'clock a.m. So it's at night, yeah, it's the middle of the night, and then by the time the daycare opens, the parents are already back home. So it's there is no way that there's no sense in bringing the child to the daycare centers because the parents are already there at home. So daycare centers, 9 to 5, 9 to 6 kind of daycare centers does not meet the needs of the many of the migrant workers. Also, daycare centers can be high fee, so some migrant workers are not able to send. So you can see here again another quote, which shows that the factory workers think that it's hopeless, and the employers will not have any willingness to have this kind of a daycare center. So it's the options that migrant workers have can be quite limited. Also, it also depends on how much they are able to negotiate with the employer, and then negotiation with the employer can be also very difficult, especially because migrant workers cannot form labor unions. So without the union, it's very difficult to discuss with the employers. So this one just is a repeat of what I was just saying, but then I just wanted to share with you with numbers. You can see, so this study in 2013 shows that, again, shows different kinds of childcare patterns. And depending on the location, you can see here that the patterns are very different. Yeah, so for example, Sri Pagoda Pass is a border area between Thailand and Myanmar, but then it's very easy to go back and forth between Myanmar and Thailand. So many people actually commute to Thailand in order to work in Thailand. So that's why you have a lot of people who take care of themselves, take care of the children by themselves, because like when the child is small, they stay in the Burmese side, and then when they can afford, they start to come to Thailand. So that's why you see more people who are taking care of them by themselves. But then you can see here that in Bangkok there is very few people who would take you can see here that there are more people who have a paid caretaker in Mesot, because Mesot have a large migrant community. So that's why it's much easier to find some elderly woman who might be able to take care of the children with the affordable price. So that's why you do get people who can do that in Mesot. But then that does not happen in Bangkok, because like it will be too expensive in Bangkok. Yeah, so yeah, and then in Bangkok, it's very difficult to bring anybody, to have any kind of other kind of options. So the only option that they have is to send their children back home. So this one also the same. Tilawa is Myanmar, Phnom Penh is Cambodia, Mahanta is also Cambodia, Tak is Thailand. Again, you can see here that migrant workers do not really depend. It's very much onto them. The child care is very much onto the workers, and then not so many people, except for Phnom Penh, not so many people would depend even to their mothers in order to do child care. So with this, the conclusion is that I want to bring here is that this very heavy responsibility of childcare, which is solely on women. So it's very, so women make all the decisions, but then the responsibility is also on women. So it's nothing empowerment about this, and it's just pure responsibility, pure burden for women to think about what to do with childcare. And then by looking at this variety of childcare, what we see is that the childcare arrangement is not very simple. Yeah, so it's very difficult to find somebody that women can actually delegate, yeah, childcare. So it's this complicated power relations that she have, what kind of resources they have, she has access to, shapes what kind of options she will be able to have in order to do her childcare arrangement. And then even with all these options, it really doesn't change the division of labor. The division of labor that women are basic child caretakers really doesn't change. So it's a very sticky issues that we can see here in when we try to list down all the childcare arrangement. Still, the responsibility lies on women. So when we want to come up with the childcare support for migrant women, it's not that simple that, okay, let us have a creche or let us have maternity leave. And then, so that can be kind of one option, but then we can see here that actually does not really meet the needs of migrant workers' childcare arrangement. So because the childcare arrangement is decided by this, what kind of expectations women are living through, what kind of values that they might have, what kind of identities that they have, identity as mothers and workers and daughters, and then because of that sense of identity, she also decides on certain childcare arrangement, or the expectation that they think she thinks that she is expected to do in her economic situation, what other people around her is doing. So all these kind of things shapes the kind of childcare arrangements. It's not something that is so simple. So by analyzing childcare arrangement, we will also be able to have better understanding of how women view themselves and what options they think they have and the resource that they have, both tangible and intangible. So when we want to, so the employers, the support from the employers is not only about crashes and all that, but then it's really working condition, housing, their legal status, and all that have to all come into the scope in order to develop a viable support system for migrant workers. So this presentation is based on this book in chapters. So for more information, it's also there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kyoko, for that very enlightening presentation. I now invite Professor Govind Kelkar, our chair, for her remarks. Govind ma'am, are you there?
Sure. I would suggest that we go to the other discussants and speakers, and then I would come on to sum up.
Okay, all right. So then we would go to our discussants. We have our first discussant, Professor Babu P Ramesh. He is professor and dean at the School of Development Studies and also the director at the Center for Research Methods at Ambedkar University, Delhi. So over to you.
Thanks a lot, Professor Kyoko, because this was a very, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. You know, it was a very interesting presentation, and I am very happy to know about these social reproduction aspects of women workers. And frankly speaking, I haven't worked on this area, though I have worked on migration related things. Probably this childcare related aspects so far I haven't looked into. So for me, it was a kind of learning, and I could get a sense of the situation from your vivid presentation. Thanks for that. But at the same time, I was also thinking that like probably I can add certain supplementary points to like what you have already explained from the other South Asian countries. For instance, I want to bring one dimension. For instance, when you were explaining, though you haven't told it very explicitly, you have been very strongly suggesting that it is patriarchal norms that govern this entire story. And there are we can see that the patriarchal norms are governing this entire migration scenario, where women's movement and women's decision making, all these things are controlled by societal norms and familial norms, and community is entering directly or visibly or silently, like there is a kind of a community decision, or the policy framework is also designed in such a way that women's mobility things are decided as per patriarchal norms. I am thinking about a particular system that is prevalent in that was introduced in Sri Lanka recently. There is a family background report system. In that family background report system, there is a stipulation that those women who want to migrate, they had to get a clearance from a local officer who will ensure that there is a person to take care of childcare requirements of the family. Then only women will get a kind of a clearance. And Sri Lanka, you know that compared to other South Asian countries, Sri Lanka is a country where women are in international migration, women outnumber men, and there are lots of women who are into the stream of international migration. So introduction of a family background system brings a kind of a uh, hindrance or a kind of a restriction that women cannot freely migrate. So in certain situations, we can see that in India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, not in Pakistan, Pakistan and Afghanistan, we can see that women's migration, international migration is not that high in terms of number or proportion because the patriarchal controls are very strong. In other countries, including India, Bangladesh, and like Nepal and Sri Lanka, what we could see that there are restrictions imposed by the government, the state, in terms of like in certain sectors, women can participate in migration, or if women are migrating for certain jobs, that is fine. If they are going for certain other jobs, it is not good. Or there is an age restriction, introduction of age restriction. So all these things, we can clearly see that it is a kind of like a patriarchal control that governs the situation. So I just thought that like adding this particular aspect maybe like probably you can see that there may be similar situations. You maybe I would like to know from you that whether within the policies can you sense that there is this kind of restrictions which are injected by certain vested traditional orthodox interests? That is one. Another aspect which I would like to, of course, everyone will be interested to know that thing like during this particular pandemic period, what was happening to each of these systems? Because you are telling that it is obligatory from the part of women to send money back home, whereas during the pandemic, probably they may not be able to send money back home, and they may not be even able to meet their own expenses. You can see that in India and several other countries, though lots of exodus of migrant workers happened during lockdown and all. Relatively, women's presence in these kind of groups were very less. For instance, we had instances in borders and near railway stations where lots of people were coming out and protesting and all. Women were not there. Relatively, women's number was less, and that it doesn't mean that women are not working as migrants. It means that women do not have that kind of a mobility compared to men. So because of this mobility control, they may be forced to work in certain kind of restricted situations they will be working. We could also see that when there is a policy level control on women, I was talking about the earlier system, there we could see that those people, those women who are aspiring to move out to other countries for work, if there is a restriction, what will happen is that it will also lead to undocumented migration, or it will also lead to illegal migration. And when they are taking undocumented migration as a kind of path, obviously they will be falling prey to many other exploitative situations. So I just thought that it's not like questions. I was trying to add some more dimensions, and I was also trying to know whether you have certain things to give on these kind of aspects. And I'm sure that there are other discussions, and they will also be having many other very valid points. So I'm not taking much time. Thanks a lot. It was a very good presentation, and it was a very good informative presentation, which at least I got lots of dimensions related to social reproduction and childcare from your very clear presentation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Ramesh. We now have our second discussant, Professor Ritu Agarwal. She is an associate professor at the Center for East Asian Studies in the School of International Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University, JNU, Delhi. Ma'am, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And, it follows some of the important points which recently Professor Babu P Ramesh has, talked about. See, I must say that Professor Kyoko, it was very insightful, kind of presentation where I really came to know some of the fascinating aspects of, the way you describe the women's lives in the countries where they are migrating to, and what are the kind of challenges they are facing. Something which I was very intrigued and very interesting to know more about you is this whole idea of a Great Mekong sub-region. Because I myself, and I'm sure Professor Kilkar also has a lot of things to add in that. Yunnan, where actually I was going for quite some time. And, this whole issue of these borders, that, how in one case, all these neighboring countries in a way create a sense of flexibilities, in the sense that because they have this kind of labor arrangements where they need a huge labor force, and which is available in the nearby neighboring countries, and they make this arrangement of flexibilities where all this labor force can come in and work in this factory regime, which you're talking about, the garment factories in in Thailand especially. And then in other kind of sections, for example, in terms of a childcare, in terms of their staying and housing and other kind of a citizenship. I mean, if you talk about citizenship also, there is a kind of a silence from the state. So they use this kind of a peripheries. I mean, this Mekong sub-region has been talked about as a kind of a the border peripheries, and I'm sure many of people have. I was recently reading about reading a book by very interesting scholar talking about the art of neighboring, where especially in case of Chinese border areas, where China is trying to create a yet another space which looks different from the border areas. But that was a kind of a different discussion. But here, what I'm found very intrigued, which you talked about, is that on the one hand, you have this governance, border governance, where you create a kind of flexibilities because you need labor force to come into this factory regime. And then on some of the issues, you remain completely silent because you don't want, state doesn't want to address all these issues. So there's a spaces which are created by the state, and then there are spaces which are non-state. So, and then that's where the women fit in. So the migrant woman is a kind of a situation where you get in because the state has created those space for you, you work for that, and then certain spaces where you have to be on your own. So, this is the first question which I thought that very interestingly you have taken this particular country's case studies, and that too a series of years of field work which you have conducted in these areas. And so I was just thinking that, for example, you are saying that there are some situation where a woman can go back. So you have this, flexibility of going back and forth same day, and you can take care of children. So that becomes easier. But there are situations where you have to either bring your children to the countries where then you have to arrange the childcare, or otherwise you leave them behind. So this is a one aspect, which I thought that there's something called border peripheries and bordering, this particular concept maybe has a special role to play in this migration story which you are talking about in this presentation. Second thing which I thought will be interesting to think about, for example, in China, migration has been mainly rural to urban phenomenon, and of course there is a kind of a interprovincial migration as well. So, and there's a particular concept we use for this migrant population. Of course, people have talked about sojourners, and then they talked about Nung Min Kung, for example, the agricultural workers, which has actually trying to move to the cities. So there's this concept of phenomenon of migration, and of course, there's a huge idea of left behind children, and something which Chinese state doesn't want to talk about much. So there is also this idea of millions of children who are left behind in the Chinese villages for the grandparents to take care of them, and then wait for the Spring Festival, which is Chinese New Year, for their parents to look at them after a year or so. So this has been a kind of a, lot of psychological as well as emotional stress. So what I want you to look at also, the kind of psychological and the emotional stress on children who basically miss their parents a lot, and the impact it has on their upbringing and later on their life. Because I remember even my Chinese friends, sometimes they say that they were in their generation where the parents have moved out for the better kind of a greener pastures, and they were just left behind, longing for their parents for long, and then created a kind of emotional deprivation which has an impact on their upbringing in the years to come as well. So what happened to this emotional loss which these families are paying in a big way? So I think and then third is that the kind of new actors you bring in, for example, the role of monasteries, or the role of monk, which you talked about, temples, or the kind of religious setup which these countries have created, or maybe it's a kind of, it was there. So in the sense, this the kind of housing arrangements which they have made, and where there's always a fear of police surveillance, which you talked about, I mean, for the migrant population. And then somewhere they're looking for an alternative arrangement. So what about this kind of alternative arrangements? Is this something that migrant population is not able to create, of their own, of this arrangement of their own in this kind of a destination countries? Or is it something which, they are not able to create new, but in a way using which was there, with some kind of arrangements of negotiation, which can actually take care of their children so that they can work in their place. So this is a third thing which I wanted you to just elaborate if possible. And last, maybe that very fascinating, because I was so much taken by so much of the kind of description as well as the kind of details given about your field work. The whole the way you talked about as a distance mothering. Yeah, so the concept you have used is that I think I have written somewhere. Yeah, so basically it's a distance motherhood. Yeah, so this is something which also I think most of these countries which are going through this migration had to grapple with this idea of that, how motherhood is possible in a distant kind of a situation where you have no other alternative but to go for migration. So I think I'll stop here and wait for the others also to speak.
Thank you, Professor Agarwal. Professor Childcare, if you would like to come in now.
Okay, thank you.
Ma'am, your video is off.
Okay.
Yes, okay.
No, I enjoyed very much, although I have not worked on migration as such, but it was really very, very detailed and fascinating study. And also, I mean, can I call Professor Kyoko as Kyoko, because I have known her for a number of years during my AIT days, so got used to calling her Kyoko. So so that is what I would use. So Kyoko's presentation was really on kind of thing that was that how and what kind of conditions women are working. And both child care facilities has become the responsibility of women, whether they are within the house or they are outside the house. So the fundamental aspect was that, as she pointed out very well, the division of labor doesn't change. It is considered the sole kind of responsibility of women, even if they are working for the family and they are earning money and supporting the family. So that comes out very well. I was also thinking, I am in a couple of garment industry, violence within garment industry. I'm an advisor. And what kind of sexual harassment in garment industry by supervisors is enormous. And it is considered, I think, throughout the region. And Sri Lanka may not be excluded also. Also, I have not looked at Sri Lanka, where it is considered a part of efficiency. So men are abused, women are sexually abused. by the supervisors in order to make them agile, make them efficient, not allowing them to rest or using the washrooms, etc. Under these conditions of work, and then there over the question is the heavy responsibility of childcare on women, how to arrange this and how to, what to do about it. What I wanted Kyoko to address in particular, that you say that it is the what options women might have is need support from the employers, only support from employers. Okay, what about the state? Because the market is responsible where the employers are there, and I'm glad that you have asked really the, otherwise a lot of us just not me but many of my colleagues and working in this area, they think that the state is responsible only for this kind of child care. But UN system also has been talking of the 3 Rs: redistribution, reorganizing, reducing this work. So whether the other kind of factors also come in a state in particular, because it is it is their duty to do this kind of thing. So state and sharing of the work responsibility of men by this kind of sharing the responsibility, because what comes in many number of cases, if not kind of in all cases, even when men are not working, the child care is given to someone else, to another woman or to another kind of actor. So I was thinking that if this follow up the, with Professor Babu said that how the social reproduction is to be arranged, that you brought out very well. If that is there, but this UN resolution that comes, or analysis of the feminist analysis of the UN resolution comes, that what to do with the care work to be recognized and kind of, and also to, it should be redistributed between two men and women. And that becomes very, very important. About Professor Agrawal's, Ritu's suggestions, in terms of psychological and emotional stresses on left behind children. I mean, there have been, China has this fascinating view now, left behind women, left behind children, and that has kind of become a phrase kind of thing. But aren't these psychological and emotional stresses not only on left behind children? There are other children also, because the whole kind of that you raise children in a kind of in an isolated state. That is becoming, I don't know whether if we study Africa, child care in Africa, there may be kind of mothering where mothering is distributed. So aunt would be there who will look after the children. So, and someone's sister will be there that will look after the children. When I was in UNIFEM, I happened to go to Kerala on some project, looking that there is high migration of women going to Middle East, and how do they arrange childcare? And there is very heavy drinking of men. At that time there was, I still hear the report, but at that time particularly noticed. What they did, that women divided the child care between two sisters or three sisters. So one sister would go for 3 years and all the children will be looked by the other sister or the cousin sister, one with whom they were close. And then she will come back after 3 years. She will send the money. And then that sister would go and her children would be looked by the other person, and she would take responsibility for 2 to 3 years, whatever the amount of period. And when I discussed with them, they said, I said, what about your husband? What does he do? And then they say, oh, he's a casual worker. But he was nowhere in the list of the child care, that is the, and women's trust, where they did not even grumble kind of thing. They made this arrangement. Then I happened to ask them a question that how do you look at your mother? And then children really started saying that, oh, mother is one who raises us, who does everything. She feeds us. She is mother. I mean, that was it. So what about your father? And the father, what they said, which I still remember very vividly, even after 12 years. The father is like a ATM machine. So I said, what do you mean ATM machine? That he gives money, but he had nothing to do with us. And then the other child, and this was the 8-year or 9-year-old boy who was saying this, but they didn't look at the kind of, so it is not really emotional stress on children, but it is also emotional displacement of men not being involved in the family, and which really leads to other kind of things. So it is a part of social system that is being destroyed by this kind of arrangement. Of course, one could say that poverty is the factor which leading to it. Well, this is true, but I'm just saying where is the right and how the migrant live and what they do and what kind of arrangement is there. So we look at only in terms of childcare, which has been very focused attention and very well kind of analyzed in very detail. But this is aspect also need to be looked at when we are dealing with the migration, that uncaring, distant men are also being created by the system, who really don't have living in itemized in silos, not relating to family and all this. That would be the structure of the new social system that is happening as a result of that. So these are the few questions that are coming to my mind, not only questions but afterthoughts in terms of that why it is now unpaid care, and the recognition of this kind of care work, unpaid care work has, or social reproduction has become important. And what is the relationship between production and social reproduction? That is also very well brought out. That is what my understanding came up. Thank you very much, Kyoko, and Professor Babu and Professor Ritu Agrawal.
Thank you, Professor Childcare. It's over to you, Professor Kyoko, to respond to these remarks.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, maybe I come backwards. Yeah. So from starting from Professor Kelka's comment on this men, detached men, displaced men, because I think this is very a very important insight. Because like among the migrant workers, that's what they will also say, that daughters, even when they get married, they will still continue to remit. So they are still daughters. But then their sons, once they get married, they become somebody else. So they do not remit anymore. So that relationship get cut with different kind of relationships. So men's relationship gets cut very easily compared to that of women. Yes, woman for women, the responsibility is very heavy and this and that, but then at the same time, the relationship kind of lingers everywhere. So that can also be a responsibility. It's most of the time it's responsibility, but it's also kind of a continuing, enduring kind of a relationship. Because I think this is very important because, for example, if I look back to Japan, men are the ones who become homeless. They cannot sustain relations. They do not become fathers. They do not become husbands much easier than women. Yeah, because so this detachedness, displacement of men is actually a very alarming issue, which I think not so many people have really talked about. And then I think what Dr. Kyoko was talking about in this this men's detachment is a very important insight when we look at childcare and also relationship of women and men as well. So that's and then also this issue of so how care work should be done, and then how and then I want to go to this issue of border, which Dr. Ritu Agrawal have mentioned. I think that's very important because actually this whole research started because of the border, because we also see that border is a very interesting place where the state power is kind of a little bit murky, because the state surveillance is much stronger in capital area and then more in the central area, but in the border fringes, the state control become a little bit loose, except for the border in and out. So other than that, the norms and the state control is much less. And then that's where we also find that in the border area, the gender norms can be a little bit more, little bit loose than other places. So that's where we also see that the child care in border areas, they have more option because the gender norms and state surveillance is less. So that's why they can come up with various kind of child care arrangement, and then that is allowed. Whereas in the capital area, that is not allowed. So that's very important to note, because if we look at what kind of options they have, we also can see how loose the gender norms, how much they are able to challenge gender norms. And then that's very an interesting area in terms of the border perspective as well. So in terms of the psychological pressure, I think this is also very important. Yeah, the left behind children, left behind women. So but then what we also hear is the left behind grandmothers psychological pressure, because everything is now dumped to the grandmothers, and grandmother thinks that this is their role to take care of everybody. So actually it's also very much that kind of role that is often not highlighted, but then it's very much something that also contributes to the behind children's well-being, is also this grandmother psychological pressure, and then also financial pressure as well. Um, um, so I think there was also some chat and questions that about this monastery, how this monastery work. Um, Again, this monastery that I was talking about, that they leave the children there, is at the border. It's not at the center area. So the center area, again, there's a lot of state surveillance. So this kind of alternative childcare is very difficult to develop. So, but in the border area, we do see like this kind of a different arrangement by the community, by the group of people, and by the monastery to take care. So, but then this is not this is not often. So that means that they don't get any state support. So state kind of totally neglects these kind of issues, and then it's so that's why it is done by the monastery. So again, what it goes back to what Dr. Kyoko was saying about what about the state? Yeah, what about the not only the employers, but what about the state? Yeah, um, uh, so in one sense, migrant workers are very are able to manage by using these kind of resources. So that's where the state kind of washes their hands and say that it's being taken care of. Actually, it's not being taken care of, but then because women are stepping up to do something, because I mean they cannot just leave the children to be on the streets. So that's why they do something. So that's why the state says, like even the government, I think it was also in the chat, the Thai government thinks that childcare, we are okay, because like we have a very Asians have a very good tradition that the grandmother will look after children. Yeah, but then that does not happen. That does not happen in most of the case. So that is where we also wanted to highlight that there's a myth that just because women are able to manage does not mean that there's no problem around here. So I think, and then I thank you very much also for Dr. Ramesh for this important issue about the patriarchal norms. Yes, it is basically patriarchal norms that put everything a woman, and then with this internalized patriarchal norms that a woman have, which kind of perpetuate also this kind of arrangement that happens, that it's all women's responsibility. And so this so this mobility control is also there for migrant workers in Thailand as well, but not to the extent of South Asian women. But then their immobility is more in the sense of they cannot hide away, or they cannot run away from their family or the society. So they can move around physically, but then they cannot kind of disappear. They will kind of be followed. So they are kind of their whereabouts and what they're doing is reported. Whereas men, that doesn't happen. Yeah, but then for women, that she's working here, she's working there, she's now with this man, that man. So that all these kind of things are being reported back home. So that kind of control over women's mobility is still very much there, and that is the reason why women are forced to remit, because people back home know where she is, what she's how much she's earning and everything. So that's why they still feel obliged to remit, whereas men sometimes they can just make themselves silent and can get away with many things. So I think those are very some issues. And thank you very much. These were very, very insightful comments.
Thank you, Professor Kyoko, for your response. I think we can go to everyone for another brief round of comments, and then after that, we can take up the remaining questions from the audience. So starting with Professor Ramesh, if no more comments, okay. All right, Professor Ritu Agarwal, would you like to comment? If you have any more comments, yes.
Just one small comment, because Professor Kyoko has talking about people migrating from Myanmar to Thailand. So is there some particular ethnic community from Myanmar which you think is more in migration spree than others? And how these ethnic communities are able to make a kind of a space for themselves in Thailand? So is there something ethnic dimensions to it as well? That's the only question.
Govind ma'am, do you have any more?
No, I just wanted to add a footnote kind of thing, that I looked at Sri Lanka in terms of the migrant households. And repeatedly, it was about 10 households, which are, again, it was part of that UNIFEM, UN Women study, that in all these households, women complain that they sent remittances home with the instruction to their parents and to their brothers. So I'm talking of and in two cases, the husband, that their remittances, when they were sending, they should be deposited in their account. But these women, when they return, they complain that not only they were not deposited in their account, when they came back, then they found that there was a total control by the brothers, or by, if the father was active, by the fathers. And they absolutely had nothing in their bank that they could support themselves. And when they complained, then there was a kind of quarrel and violence in a couple of cases that they need to go back. So there was tremendous pressure that you are earning this money, so why don't you go back? What are you doing here? You are wasting your time, you are lazing around. So this kind of, whether we call it very strong patriarchal norms with regard to control over finances also exist there in this kind of remittances. Mobility, this is also a control on mobility. That there is the age factor, which you find in case of Nepal, in case of India also, and it is also a state is involved. So when a young woman goes outside to work situation, she's considered that she's a loose woman. She's going for sexual trafficking or sexual services. And when the woman goes about, when she has got the two children, the kind of do bachon ki maa, okay, this is out, then it is considered safe for her, but safe in the sense of the patriarchal norms. And these are the things also associated in which these migrant women are working. It is much more in South Asia than in probably that part of Southeast Asia, but it exists in Southeast Asia also to some extent. It is not free from that. Is that correct or not? That's what I wanted to, refer to as a sub-question to Kyoko.
Thank you, ma'am. Are there any comments from you, Professor Ramesh, or we can go to the questions?
Babu sir, please unmute yourself.
Sir, you are on mute.
Yeah, actually, I don't have any more points to discuss, but it was a very learning, it's a learning exercise. And I got several other dimensions also. And as Professor Kelkar explained, it has lots of things to do, like how the society's value judgments that affects the policy, and that brings in certain kinds of constraints for women's free mobility. And I'm sure that probably like one point where I wanted more details from you is about what has happened during this COVID period. So probably like I asked, because especially the systems which were thriving on women's remittances, what has happened to those systems? So probably like you may be in the second round, you may be telling about that thing. Because I am sure that in many cases, when women, if you see the remittances, women are the major remittance group. If women are getting certain kind of payments, a major portion of the payment will be going back to home. So that means they are the lifelines of the family in terms of sending money regularly. So if there is a stop, if there is a kind of a reduction in the flow of remittances from women, that is going to have a major impact on the family. That's why we are telling women's migration is much more crucial for the survival of families back home. So from that point of view, I would like to know from your, probably you must have done the study earlier. I know that it is up to 2018, 2006 to 2018, you have done the study. But after that also, you must be keeping an eye on what is happening. And you must have got some insights related to what is happening during this COVID period, related to your study region and the subjects you have studied. So if you can just extend the discussion with certain kind of observations or insights that you have got, that will be really insightful. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ramesh. Professor Kyoko, there are 5 or 6 questions. I will just read them out and you can choose to pick up the ones that you would like to address. From Dr. Roshan Ara, Kashmir University, we have, he's asking, how are women in Thailand involved in unpaid work and how can we help the government frame the policies for childcare? Then we have a question on other platforms. One is Professor Kyoko mentioned the mandate for daycare centers. It would be useful to understand the policy landscape for childcare in Thailand and Myanmar. Is the enforcement apparatus effective? And also, how does women's migration affect outcomes for children? Are there any international studies we can look at? Then another question in Q&A is around child prostitution in Thailand, and where are the challenges and what are your recommendations? And what are the protection and regulations against this? Then we have questions from Harbhajan Jeet Singh, who is asking, does rural to urban migration of families ensure better education for the children? Are there government policies in Myanmar to provide midday meals to poor children in government schools? And also, how much does religion impact the upbringing of children in these two countries? What is the status of nutrition, and does the government come to a rescue in both countries? Then there are also questions on how skill development and jobs are ensured for children who are dropping out from school in these countries. What is the sort of social policy and support for migrant working women? And what can we learn from Thailand and Myanmar in this aspect, especially during the pandemic, and considering the digital divide and inflation during the pandemic? I mean, all these aspects. So these are the questions that have come up, and you can choose to respond to these along with the comments that have come up. Yeah, over to you, Ma.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for very, very insightful questions and comments, and really, really appreciate, and I'm really learning a lot through this discussion as well. First of all, about the ethnicity of these migrant workers, many of them are Burmans. Burmans are the majority, the central area ethnic group, and they come because they are the one who have more connection, and who have more money, and who is more exposed. So that's why they're able to come to Thailand, not because of other reasons. So ethnicity wise, there are more people who are in the center area are the people who are coming for migration. So it's not the most marginalized in Myanmar are coming. The most marginalized in Myanmar are actually staying in Myanmar. So that's one thing. About the remittances that Dr. Kyoko have also mentioned, it's very much, I mean, the case that Professor Kyoko have described is also the case in many of the migrant workers in Thailand as well. They remit back home with some instruction, but it's never followed. Or like even the saving that they had even before migration, that was even used up. So it's really they remit a lot, but then they do not really get anything for themselves. They don't have a very few control. It's also very interesting to note that they say that women remit more, but then it's in terms of amount, men actually remit more because men's wages are higher. However, men remit in the first 3 years, but then after that they stop remitting. Whereas for women workers, they remit less amount, but forever. So that's why in the end of the day, women remit much more. So this is, so, and then even for when the crisis is there, women still continue to remit. Women even borrow money and remit. Yeah, because the interest rate in Thailand is lower than in Myanmar, so they will borrow money in Thailand and remit back home. So that much commitment to remittances is also there, which is also make women very, very vulnerable in that sense. So this also happened during COVID. During COVID, many migrant workers have lost their job. Like garment factory industry have gone down 60% in terms of demand. So many people were either fired or whether they were kind of asked to stay home. So their income had drastically gone down. So some people, some workers went back because actually Thailand was in COVID much earlier than the neighboring countries. So when Thailand got the first wave, everybody got scared and then they went back home to, so many people also went back home during that time. So, but afterwards, Thailand also do not have enough people, so they needed migrant workers. So that's why they are now giving quite generous visa provisions so that people can stay on. But then anyway, many people have gone back home. Now that is a problem, as you just also mentioned, because they do not have enough, they do not have the income, they do not have the remittances that they used to have before. And it's not this, and then even back home, the economy have gone down because of COVID. So this situation have really given them double impact in terms of their income, because no remittances and less income back home, and you have another person to eat inside the house. So there's a lot of frictions actually, not really coming up very strongly, but then we kind of hear here and there that it's there are a little bit of a kind of underlying conflict because of this economic difficulty. So in terms of safety, as that Dr. Kyoko was also talking about, of migrant workers, this is also a case for these Burmese migrant workers in Thailand as well, not as much as in South Asia, but still so. That is the reason why women migrant workers do not go out at night so often as men migrant workers because of security issue. That is the reason why, even though we have more, even in places where we have more women migrant workers, the deportation rate is much higher for men. So men get caught and get deported because they roam around everywhere, and then so that's why they got caught by the police and they'll get deported. Whereas women don't move around because of security issue, so they don't get deported. So it's very clear in the statistics that the men do get caught and then get deported. As for the education for children, so the remittances are very important for education for children. Many of the migrant workers say that they remit back home in order for their own children or their siblings' education. So so that is very important for Myanmar, because Myanmar education is very expensive. So some migrant workers, they bring the children to Thailand because Thailand education is cheaper. And then Thailand border area, again, because of the loose restrictions, the migrant workers' children can also go to school. They also have migrant schools. So that's where they can learn even bilingual, Burmese as well as Thai. So, and then even like English, because there are some foreign volunteers come to teach English. So so they kind of take that opportunity as well at the border area. So very interesting educational opportunity that is there. So some migrant workers take this opportunity to bring the children to Thailand to go to the border migrant schools in Thailand. So that kind of thing is also there as well. In terms of child prostitution and sex workers and all that, that is a big issue, especially for children who are born in Thailand and do not have any status. And then they become stateless. They are not Burmese, they're not Thai, they do not have any ID card. These are very vulnerable children who can be abducted, who can be traded, who can be trafficked very, very easily, because there's no status. They're not supposed to exist. So so these are very big issue that is actually seems to be increasing, because there is no government a policy to do something about these children. So they are kind of left just like that. So so this can be a very big issue in the future if something does not get introduced. For the daycare center, so the unpaid work, the Thai government still have this idea that childcare is done very managed very well by the family. So it's not really inside their own policy to do something about childcare. Childcare policy in Thailand or in Myanmar is very, very weak. So it's not even discussed. So that is the kind of level of awareness that we have for childcare. So that's where we also want to push that the childcare is actually not just a matter of taking care by the mothers, and then it's something that is more important for the social structure itself. Yeah, I think yeah, and then the skill development for migrant workers, so again, the migrant workers' children cannot go to school. It's very difficult for them to go to school, and then so they tend to drop out, and then also the parents also start to convince the children or force the children to start working or start earning after they become like 12 or 13 or 14 years old. So they tend to drop out, and then after they drop out, it's very difficult for them to get another chance for skill development. There are NGOs who's trying to provide, but then it's very difficult to bring them back to school again. So we do not have so far in Thailand or in Cambodia or in Myanmar, we do not have a scheme where like migrant workers or migrant worker children who dropped out of school can go back to school through some kind of a skill development scheme. Yeah, I think that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kyoko, for responding to so many questions. Thank you. There's been a lot of discussion, and I think now we can go to Professor Kyoko to really remark on the way forward in terms of this.
Way forward. Dr. Kyoko has been so comprehensive that it's amazing that how many dimensions have been covered, not only in terms of presentation, but through question answers. That shows the kind of knowledge all around kind of thing. I don't know, one thing lingers within me, and also probably it would be in the mind of all of us. How do we change these norms? What needs to be done to change these norms, which is the kind of norms need to be addressed, they need to be relooked at, and we can no longer take the excuse, oh, this is a part of our culture, and that's why we can't do much. And even the point of that cultures change slowly and the change will come slowly. I mean, these are the things have been talked about for centuries now, or at least for half a century. So I think we need in all these studies, all these questions, where the norms have changed even a little bit. Whether I gave the example of these 10 households from Sri Lanka, but then I would look at if I have to go now, I would really look at where the norms have changed, where women have asserted their role kind of thing. Because it was simmering of this kind of agency among women when they said, all my savings, all my resources are gone, or my instructions were not followed kind of thing. Now they were not in a position to set up a separate household, but it was a simmering of the agency. Now we really want to look forward for these examples where they have really expressed, not only expressed, where they have taken an action to assert their right. So assertion of the rights is very, very important in terms of the agency, that we need kind of, this is subject of another study, but that would be the important. It will be good for children, it would be good for women, and it would be good for men. Because the Professor Babu Ramesh, you said that women have to have so much responsibility. There is an effect on men also. I mean, they feel completely hopeless, completely isolated kind of this thing. There is no one to rule, there is no one to take care of this thing, and children are not relating to them. So this is we will build a nurturing society where men would also play their role. And I think addressing the norms would be very, very important.
I also share the same view. I don't tell them like we should not share it. And I was telling what you are telling.
Yes, that's right. No, I know you agree with me, but that is the kind of thing I'm saying, that it lingers in our mind very much, that how do we look at the examples of change? Because there has been some change. It's not that nothing has changed, but we need more examples of change, and not only kind of look at the oppressive structures. That is the kind of thing that we need for our future research. But I learned a lot, and thank you so much. Ritu, Kyoko, I mean, in one way or another, we have related to both of them for a long time. So that is one aspect being in AIT, and enjoyed every minute of this discussion. Thank you. And learned, not only enjoyed, but learned also. So vote of thanks.
Anshula, not audible.
Hello?
Yes, now. Yes, go on.
Professor Kyoko, any concluding remarks from your end?
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and then the great discussion. The comments and the questions are really superb. I really it helped bring up so much very interesting dimension that Dr. Kyoko was saying. It's also just for the sake of a positive note. It's what the reason why we also wanted to bring all these childcare arrangement is also to show the ingenious of the women who are really under pressure, but then they're able to mobilize so much resources, and then able to manage things. So this ability is something that we do need to recognize. And then this recognition also might lead to better policies as well. So, so yes, so it's not that they are kind of sitting around and being victimized. It is it's very much their ingenious ability to overcome many of the issues. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So, so formally once on behalf of the IMPRI Gender Impact Studies Center, the GenDev Center for Research and Innovation and Delhi Post, I thank our speaker for today, Professor Kyoko Kusakabe, for taking out the time to deliver this very enlightening and fascinating talk on migrant workers and childcare in Thailand and Myanmar. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Govind Kelkar, for chairing the session and for your insights. And thank you to our discussants, Professor Babu P Ramesh and Professor Ritu Agarwal, for joining us and adding to the deliberation. Thank you to the audience, of course, for bringing up so many great questions and adding to the discussion, and for watching this episode. And we hope you tune in for our further episodes of Gender Gaps. Thank you once again to everyone.
Good evening. Yes, thank you, Professor Kyoko. Kalkar ma'am, Babu sir, Raitu ma'am. Have a good evening.